Supported myself since I was 16, never took a cent from my family, bought my own house at 23, and my parents sued me for ruining my brother's chance. I, 26M, stared at the legal documents on my kitchen counter, the envelope still torn where I'd ripped it open 20 minutes ago. My parents were suing me. Actually suing me. The words blurred together as I read them again. Something about emotional damages, family obligation, and lost opportunities. My coffee had gone cold in my hand. The house around me felt different suddenly. Every corner I'd painted, every fixture I'd installed myself, every piece of furniture I'd saved months to buy, all of it felt tainted now. This place was supposed to be mine. The one thing in my life that nobody could touch or claim or take credit for. I'd bought it at 23 with money I'd earned completely on my own, and now my parents wanted to drag me to court over it. I needed to sit down. The lawsuit claimed I'd deliberately sabotaged my younger brother's future by refusing to co-sign on a house loan for him last month. According to the papers, my refusal had caused him severe emotional distress and damaged his prospects for building wealth. The amount they were seeking made my stomach turn, $50,000 in damages. The whole thing was absurd. But I knew exactly why they were doing this, and it had nothing to do with my brother's actual well-being. Let me back up. I moved out when I was 16. Not because I wanted some grand adventure or because I was rebellious. I left because staying meant disappearing. My brother was 14 then, 2 years younger, and he was the sun around which our entire family orbited. Every conversation at dinner revolved around his sports achievements, his grades, his college prospects. My parents had decided early on that he was special, destined for greatness, and they poured everything into making that happen. I wasn't neglected exactly. I had food, clothes, a roof over my head, but I was functionally invisible. When I made honor roll, my mother would nod absently and ask if I'd seen my brother's science fair project. When I got my first job at 15, my father told me it was good I was learning responsibility, then immediately pivoted to discussing my brother's upcoming basketball tournament. The breaking point came during my junior year of high school. I'd been saving money from my job at a local grocery store, keeping it in a shoebox in my closet. Stupid, I know, but I was 16 and didn't have a bank account yet. I'd saved nearly $800 over 6 months. One day I came home and it was gone. All of it. When I confronted my parents, my mother explained calmly that my brother needed new equipment for his travel team and they'd fallen short on funds. She said I'd understand since it was for family. I didn't ask permission or make a scene. I just started planning my exit. 2 weeks later, I moved in with my friend's family. His parents were going through a rough patch financially and were happy to have me pay modest rent in exchange for the basement room. I worked full-time hours at the grocery store while finishing high school, graduated on time, and never asked my parents for anything again. They barely noticed I was gone. My mother called once, 3 days after I moved out, asking if I'd be home for my brother's game that weekend. When I told her I didn't live there anymore, there was a long pause, and then she asked if I could still make it to the game. I hung up. The years that followed were hard but clarifying. I worked 2 jobs through community college, lived in a cramped studio apartment with a roommate, ate ramen more nights than I could count. But every dollar I earned was mine. Every decision I made was mine. I finished my associate degree, got certified in IT, and landed a decent job at a mid-sized tech company. By the time I was 23, I'd saved enough for a down payment on a small house in a decent neighborhood. The day I got the keys felt like winning the lottery. The house was nothing spectacular, a modest 2-bedroom with outdated fixtures and a yard that needed work, but it was mine. I'd earned every square foot of it. I didn't tell my parents about the house initially. We had minimal contact by then, obligatory appearances at Thanksgiving and Christmas, brief and uncomfortable. But somehow my brother found out, probably through social media or mutual acquaintances, and the call started. First, my mother phoned to congratulate me, though her tone suggested she thought I'd somehow cheated or gotten lucky. She asked how much I'd paid, what my mortgage was, whether I'd needed help from anyone. I kept my answers vague. Then my father called with a different angle. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to let my brother stay with me while he looked for work after college. I declined politely. My brother graduated around the time I turned 24. He'd gone to a decent state school on a partial sports scholarship, majored in business, and emerged with no clear direction and a lot of debt. My parents were still supporting him fully. He lived in their house, drove a car they'd bought him, had his insurance and phone bill covered. He'd held a few short-term jobs, but nothing stuck. Meanwhile, I'd been promoted twice and was making good money. I renovated my house slowly, doing most of the work myself. I built a life that felt stable and separate from the chaos of my childhood. The trouble started 6 months ago when my brother suddenly decided he wanted to buy a house too. Not because he needed one or could afford one, but because I had one and he couldn't stand being behind. My mother called and explained that he'd found a perfect property but needed a co-signer for the loan since his credit and employment history were shaky. She asked if I would help him. I said no immediately. The conversation that followed was one-sided and loud. She accused me of being selfish, of abandoning my family, of thinking I was better than everyone else. She said my brother looked up to me and I was crushing his dreams. I let her finish, then calmly explained that co-signing a loan would make me legally responsible for a debt I couldn't control, and I wasn't willing to risk the financial stability I'd worked a decade to build. She hung up on me. My father called next with the guilt trip approach. He reminded me of all the years they'd raised me, fed me, housed me. I reminded him I'd been supporting myself since 16 and had never taken a cent from them since. He got angry then and said I was ungrateful and cruel. I told him I was protecting myself and hung up. My brother never called me directly. That was typical. He'd always let our parents fight his battles. The loan fell through without a cosigner. My brother didn't get the house. According to my parents, this was entirely my fault, and he'd fallen into a depression over it. My mother sent me long texts about how I destroyed his confidence and his future. My father left voicemails saying I'd regret turning my back on family. I blocked their numbers and moved on with my life. Or tried to. Then the lawsuit arrived. I called my friend who'd let me stay with his family all those years ago. He was a lawyer now, working in family law ironically enough. When I read him the details over the phone, he was silent for a long moment before letting out a low whistle. He told me the case was frivolous and wouldn't hold up in court, but that didn't mean it wouldn't be expensive and stressful to fight. He offered to represent me at a discount, which I accepted gratefully. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, my lawyer advised me to document everything. Every conversation, every text message, every interaction with my family going back as far as I could remember. I spent days combing through old emails and messages, reconstructing the timeline of my relationship with my parents and brother. It was depressing work. What struck me most was how little affection existed in any of our exchanges. Every conversation was transactional or obligatory. There were no inside jokes, no genuine concern, no warmth. I was a supporting character in their story, occasionally useful but mostly irrelevant. I decided I wasn't going to just defend myself. I was going to end this permanently. My lawyer and I prepared a countersuit. We went after them for the $800 they'd stolen from me when I was 16. Adjusted for inflation and interest, it came to about $1,200. We also documented every instance of emotional neglect and favoritism, building a case that they'd failed in their parental duties and had no moral or legal standing to demand anything from me now. It wasn't about the money. It was about making a point. The day of the hearing arrived. I wore my best suit and showed up early. My parents and brother arrived 20 minutes late, looking irritated at having to be there. My brother wore jeans and a wrinkled shirt. My mother kept shooting me angry looks across the courtroom. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Their lawyer presented their case first. It was as flimsy as my lawyer had predicted. Lots of emotional language about family bonds and obligations, but no actual legal standing. They claimed I'd caused emotional distress by refusing to help my brother, that I'd flaunted my success while he struggled, that I owed the family for raising me. Their lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive and selfish. When it was our turn, my lawyer systematically dismantled their argument. He presented bank statements showing I'd been financially independent since 16. He showed the timeline of my minimal contact with my family, the lack of support they'd provided during my adult life. He brought up the stolen $800 and presented my countersuit. Then he played his trump card. He'd tracked down my old roommate from those early years, the friend whose family had taken me in. He'd written a statement describing the condition I'd been in when I arrived. Exhausted, defeated, essentially abandoned by my family at 16. The statement detailed how I'd worked myself ragged to stay afloat while my parents focused all their resources on my brother. The judge listened to everything with an increasingly stern expression. When both sides had finished, She took less than 10 minutes to make her ruling. She dismissed my parents' lawsuit entirely, calling it frivolous and a waste of the court's time. Then she turned to my countersuit. She ruled in my favor for the full $1,200 plus court costs. But more than that, she issued a formal rebuke of my parents, stating that they had no legal or moral standing to demand financial support from a child they'd effectively abandoned, and that their attempt to use the legal system to punish me for setting boundaries was inappropriate and concerning. My mother's face went red. My father stared at the floor. My brother looked confused, like he didn't quite understand what had just happened. As we filed out of the courtroom, my mother tried to approach me. She started to say something about how I'd embarrassed the family, how I'd made them look like terrible parents in front of a judge. I stopped her before she could finish. I told her calmly that she'd done that herself, that I'd spent 10 years building a life without them, and I'd spend the next 50 the same way. I told her not to contact me again. My brother finally spoke then, asking why I hated him so much. The question was so absurd I almost laughed. I told him I didn't hate him. I didn't feel much of anything about him at all. He was a stranger who happened to share my DNA, raised by people who'd chosen him over me at every turn. I wished him luck with his life and walked away. Update 1. That was 3 months ago. My parents paid the judgment, $1,200 plus about $3,000 in court costs. The money hit my account, and I immediately donated all of it to a local charity that helped homeless teenagers. I didn't want it. The point had never been about getting money from them. What I didn't expect was the fallout in my extended family. Word spread quickly about the lawsuit and the outcome. My mother's sister, my aunt who I'd always been vaguely fond of, called me a week after the hearing. She apologized for not seeing what was happening when I was younger, said she'd always thought I was just independent and hadn't realized how checked out my parents had been. She asked if we could have coffee. We met at a cafe near my house. She told me that my mother had been calling relatives trying to spin the story, painting me as vindictive and cruel. But most of the family wasn't buying it. They'd apparently noticed over the years how differently I was treated compared to my brother, though no one had said anything. My aunt felt guilty about that now. She also told me something I hadn't known. My brother had been trying to borrow money from various relatives for months, always with some new scheme or investment idea. Everyone had turned him down. The house loan hadn't been his first failed attempt at taking shortcuts to success. I appreciated my aunt's honesty, but I told her I wasn't interested in reconciliation with my parents or rebuilding family connections. Too much time had passed, too much damage had been done. She understood, but she asked if she could stay in touch with me separately. I agreed to that. The more interesting development came from my brother. 2 months after the hearing, he showed up at my house unannounced. I almost didn't answer the door, but curiosity got the better of me. He looked rough, tired, worn down. He asked if we could talk, and against my better judgment, I let him in. We sat in my living room, the same room I'd painstakingly painted and furnished over the past 3 years, and he told me everything. He admitted that he'd been coasting his entire life, that our parents had enabled him to the point where he didn't know how to function independently. He said the lawsuit had been their idea entirely. He'd just gone along with it because that's what he always did. He told me he was starting to realize how much pressure they'd put on him to be special, to be successful, and how he'd never actually wanted any of it. He apologized for never standing up for me, for taking everything they gave him while I got nothing. He said he understood now why I'd left and why I wanted nothing to do with them. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, I told him I appreciated the apology, but that it didn't change anything between us. We weren't brothers in any meaningful sense. We were strangers shaped by the same dysfunctional parents. I told him if he wanted to break free of their influence and build his own life, I respected that, but I couldn't be part of his journey. I'd spent too long building my own life to get pulled back into family drama. He took it better than I expected. He asked if maybe someday, years down the line, we could try to know each other as actual people rather than as the roles our parents had forced us into. I told him maybe, but I wasn't making any promises. He left after that, and I haven't heard from him since. Update 2. It's been 6 months since the hearing now. My life has settled into a comfortable rhythm. I got another promotion at work, finished the renovation of my bathroom, and started dating someone I met through a hobby group. Life is good, better than good, actually. My parents have made no attempts to contact me, which is exactly what I wanted. According to my aunt, they're struggling financially now. Without my brother as their golden child project, they seem lost. He apparently moved to another city and got a regular job, stopped taking their money. My mother keeps asking relatives if they know how he's doing, but he's not sharing much with anyone. I feel nothing about their struggles. No satisfaction, no guilt, nothing. They made their choices for decades, and now they're living with the consequences. The lawsuit and everything that followed taught me something important. You don't owe loyalty to people just because they're family. Real family, the kind that matters, is built on mutual respect, support, and genuine care. Everything else is just shared DNA and proximity. I built my life from nothing, supported myself since I was 16, bought my own house at 23, and now at 26, I'm exactly where I want to be. My parents sued me for ruining my brother's chance at an easy shortcut to success, and instead they ruined whatever slim possibility remained of having a relationship with me. I won in court, but more importantly, I won at life. I have a home I earned, a career I built, relationships I chose, and a future that belongs entirely to me. They can't touch any of it, and they never could have. That's the real victory, not the lawsuit, not the judgment, not even the satisfaction of watching them fail. The victory is in knowing that I did this all myself, that I proved I didn't need them, and that I'm thriving without them. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and leaving toxic people behind. I did both, and I've never felt more free. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot to us.